Roser, you have worked at the Argonne National Lab since 2000. You are an ecologist and biogeochemist who studies the carbon, water, and energy cycles at the ecosystem level. You study the changes occurring due to the human factors, such as land use and global climate changes. You are focusing on understanding interactions between plant roots, soil, and microbes. So you're going to tell us about wireless underground sensor networks for advancing agriculture and terrestrial ecology. So we're pretty much just staying in the terrestrial land for now, and I can tell you that we'll change to more water ecosystems right after the breakout session. But for now, welcome, Roser. It's the floor is yours.
Thank you, and well, thank you for inviting me to the Innovate Days, and thank you to the other speakers. I think you make my job here easier, I think. First, I want to start acknowledging my collaborators in this work, Suprati Guha, Shiribaz Valibada Shufeng, Zhang, Monisha Ghosh, and Gregory Grant, all at University of Chicago or Argonne National Laboratory. And also I want to thank the National Science Foundation for funding this work. What I want to talk to you today is the work I've been doing with wireless underground sensor networks, in this case for advancing agriculture and terrestrial ecology. Next, please. So all this is possible because of the emergence of the cyber-physical end-to-end sensing networks that is occurring right now. With the advent of new detectors and new technology that supports new sensors development, as you see in my left side of there, plus, for example, drones and drone technology with hyperspectral cameras and thermal cameras and many other things are coming along the pipe. And most of these sensors are wireless, and so they connect wireless to a network that then, goes to the cloud where you can curate, do mathematics, data analytics, and you can physically connect to other things, and then distribute that publicly. That's one of the biggest needs that we need now for example, in the case I'm going to present, to farmers, to people of interest, but also, as you see here, it could be sent to anybody. Everybody has a cell phone, so it really is distribution of data at large. This is all powered by an accelerating process in more power, more available, easier to use power, to greater range, and to more data rate. So it's a loop that continues to accelerate. Next. So the application I'm going to talk about is understanding soil. Briefly, just to know why we are focusing on soil, is because soil formation in geological rates, soil forms 2 to 4 times faster than is lost. Next. However, this process is very slow. Next. And so it takes 100 years to form an inch of topsoil. So basically what happens is it's a very slow process, and we all need food, and we all need to be producing food and agricultural lands being used. But erosion and management of the soils, what happens with it is that soil is lost about 50 to 100 times faster than is produced. So it's actually a world crisis. So the National Science Foundation produced this workshop a couple of years ago that was called the Subterranean Soil Microscope. The idea was to gather experimentalists, modelers, experts on soil scientists. And from that workshop, 3 main issues came out: food security, plant breeding, and energy and environmental sustainability. Basically, all the soil is important to secure sustainability of all that. And those are three important issues that touches everybody. So from farmers to scientists that want to do more accurate climate predictions, to industry, to produce plants that are not only good for production of food, but also for the environment and sustain environmental change. Next. Because of the microscope workshop, there was a consensus between all the attendees that what was really needed was sensors. What was actually lacking at this point was sensors and metrics for soil applications. In particular, spatial temporal measurements, things that can be scaled spatially at large scales or at the farmer scale, so from local to larger, and temporal, so things from seconds to hours, to days, to years. In particular, sensors that measure gases related to climate change greenhouse effect, like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. Nutrients, nitrate, phosphates, etc., in poor water. That's very important for farmers. And then soil carbon. So what it is in the soil that's fueling the microbial community. We are relying on the microbial community to decompose organic material to produce the nutrients. So what's there? Sugars, proteins, peptides, sensors that are telling us what is the amount and quantity, the amount and quality of those. And if you want to believe this, for the many years of soil science and plant, food production, there isn't really that many soil water moisture, water availability sensors in the range between 100 and 1,000 meters square. There are good point measurements and we have remote sensing, but there is a gap in this 100 to 1,000 meters square area. Soil temperature is also important for crops. And then plant issues like root mass. How much roots do you have in there? Amount of root and exudates they produce is important for carbon sequestration. So another important thing for climate change. And the last one, but not least, I think I'm glad that Scott talked first because it imprint on us the importance of the microbial community, the metagenomics, the microbial community that's there, how it changes with environment, etc. So, but we don't really have sensors that can tell us repeatedly, robustly, some measurements of a specific key variables like enzymes or a keystone microbe or a gene or a transcript or a metabolite like Scott was showing. That will be important to follow in order for us to understand for farmers soil health and for soil scientists of ecosystem health, if you want to say that. On the right side of this slide, what you see is our approach, what I'm going to talk to you about today, which is the wireless soil sensor networks, which is sensor boxes that are buried in the soil that connect wireless to a base antenna that goes to the cloud and sends the data to an AP interface, a computer interface. So these sensor boxes, our objective is to be able to send as many measurements as possible, and also have above ground measurements that will be the metadata that contributes to a whole system idea of how a farmer or an ecosystem functions. Next, please. In here, I'll tell you what we've been doing. We have already, we are on 203, but we have two previous experiments that we've done. The first one was done in Chicago on an urban area. And the second one was at Fermilab in an agricultural field that's a corn soybean rotation. Basically, the table here shows you the differences that we have between the two networks that we already have. 201 was a little bit larger area, 202 was a little smaller, and the depth distribution of the sensors was a little bit shallower in the urban, and it was deeper in the agricultural land because we needed to be under the plow layer. We needed to prove that we could measure it and not disturb the farming practices. We studied 5 soils with 202 instead of 3, and then we really need to make these more smaller, miniaturize, disturb the soil the minimum we can. So the smaller boxes that we create, the better. Our box in 202 was much smaller than 201, and our 3rd generation is even smaller. We use different control units, and we were sensing similar but slightly different things depending on the sensors that we had available. On the right side, you see the schematics of the sensor box that we are using, and a picture of it, in which you see we are using the antenna is inside the box, and then we have connected a reference sensor for our case because we needed ground truth data for our soil moisture sensing experiment. Next, please. Next, okay. So you see the field deployment here. It basically is a tripod that you see us putting on the field side. The corn was already up in this case. And below you see our antenna. Our antenna is a solar, and it's powered by solar. And then a picture of our sensors in the ground as we bury them. And on the right, you have the schematics of how our network actually looks. All these, we have 35 sensor nodes that are buried in the soil with the antenna, and they wireless transmit to a base antenna, which is the one at the center. We have a connection with Sigfox that sends all our data to the cloud, and from there we take it and we put it into an IP, an interface that makes it publicly available, and also QA, QC, all the data that comes in. Next, please. Here are some examples of our measurements that we've done so far. We are on our 3rd year of measurements in the field. Here is just an example of the 1st year. So we are measuring every 30 minutes, and we are measuring around an area of 600 meters around a radius of 600 meters around the base antenna that's at the center of this field. You can see that our temporal, which is on your left, we were able to measure volumetric water content, which is soil moisture in the soil, which is the first graph. The second is electrical conductivity of the soil, so the ionic processes in the soil, the strength of that, and soil temperature, which is the bottom of that. So you see that every 30 minutes, we gather about 150,000 data points for this site. And we could have actually gathered more, but I'm just showing this. The blue bars here are precipitation events. So we have some above ground sensors too that give us precipitation and air temperature. To your right, you have our example of the spatial variability that we were able, the power of the wireless sensor network in order to scale spatially. In this case, you see that on a sequence from March 9 to March 15, in which on March 9, we had a deluge, a lot of rain, a huge rain event that you see that our measurements are starting to be really on the yellow, the soil becomes really saturated with water. You see that happening on March 11, where the green becomes more yellowish. With time, evaporation of the soil water dries the soil, and you see the soil content going down, and now you see more green. And on March 15, you now see some blues happening there. So this is an idea of the spatial variability that we can look through the sensor network. The red points in there are actually the nodes that were buried, and the red lines are actually the soil types that we were measuring. Next slide, please.
You have one more minute.
I have a minute. Okay, so because we wanted to make sure that we could use the boxes more than the antenna that was in the box, more than just for sending the sensor signal, we wanted to see, we saw that it was attenuated by the amount of moisture in the soil. And here's the same data I showed you before, but now it's separated into seasons. And we saw that during fall and spring, we could actually correlate the soil moisture to the attenuation of the signal of the antenna from the sensor boxes. So we use a nonlinear approach using machine learning. Next slide, please. In doing that, we use a neural network that was a multi-layer perceptron, which is a deep machine learning, in which we can input several different inputs variables, and then we can test our the output of this algorithm to our measurements. And as you see, we were able to test it with a very good accuracy at not a square of 0.82, which is very good. So we were very encouraged to use the signal as a measure of soil moisture. Next slide, please. There is challenges in the development of the wireless underground sensor network. We did find out that distance of the nodes to the antenna reduces substantially the amount of data packages. And we found out that topography also influences that. So the data packages that we receive is based on the base station distance, elevation, and the localized measure of moisture. Next slide, which is last. It's just a conclusion of what I just talked, you know, that the wireless sensor network can be put into the real world and is scalable. We accomplish very high temporal resolution and then interpolating and mapping. And that we created a new algorithm for looking at soil moisture. And next slide, thank you.